A body locked in a trunk, parked on a Hollywood Hills street for weeks. A 14-year-old girl reported missing months earlier, now identified through decomposed remains. A rising R&B singer, known for a song literally called Romantic Homicide, sitting at the center of it all. 3 things happened in that Los Angeles courtroom that changed how this case looks and changed it significantly. First, text messages surfaced that flipped the narrative everyone had been running with completely. Second, the medical examiner could not definitively say how Celeste Rivas Hernandez died, and the defense used that gap in ways that will matter at trial. Third, a private investigator was physically removed from the courtroom by the prosecutor under disputed circumstances, and the fallout from that moment is not finished. This video is not about generating heat around a tragedy. It is about separating what the documented record actually shows from the version of this story that has been spreading online, because those 2 versions are not the same.
Words they've used about David's demeanor in that courtroom, they've described it as off, as sociopathic.
Inside the murder case against the singer, David.
Crime that we are dealing with is incredibly horrific and barbaric.
Prosecutors allege David killed this 14-year-old because she threatened to expose their illegal relationship, and that would have threatened his career.
I 100% believe in my heart.
Let's start with what is established and on the public record, because a lot of what is circulating right now does not meet that standard. David Anthony Burke, known professionally as D4vd, rose to mainstream attention in 2022. His song Romantic Homicide peaked at number 33 on the Billboard Hot 100. He was 21 years old at the time of his arrest in April 2026. Los Angeles County prosecutors charged him with first-degree murder with special circumstances, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation. He has been held without bail since his arrest. The victim, Celeste Rivas Hernandez, was 14 years old. Her remains were found on September 8, 2025, inside the front trunk of David's Tesla after the vehicle was towed from a street in the Hollywood Hills. Workers at the tow yard reported a foul smell. LAPD opened the trunk and found what the medical examiner would later describe as heavily decomposed and dismembered human remains.
21-year-old R&B sensation David Anthony Burke, known professionally as the singer David, is officially headed to trial. That's what a Los Angeles County judge ruled just this week after a lengthy preliminary hearing that stretched into a second week. We've been following this case for months, since the body of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez was found in September 2025 in the front trunk of David's Tesla after it was towed from the Hollywood Hills. And we've reported on the details. The autopsy report, the grand jury proceedings, the arrest, but now, through the preliminary hearing, we're finally learning key details about the case against David, and prosecutors say
those are the documented facts. What happened in the preliminary hearing added significant texture to them, and some of what came out complicated the story in ways the internet has not fully processed yet. Here is the narrative reversal that matters most, and it is worth sitting with carefully. Before the preliminary hearing, reporting on this case frequently characterized the relationship between David and Celeste as one where Celeste was the more emotionally invested party. The framing that circulated was that she was a jealous teenager pushing for more than he wanted to give. The text messages introduced in open court told a different story. According to in-court reporting from journalists present during the hearing, the messages showed David as the one raising the topics of moving in together, marriage, and having children. He is documented, per this testimony, asking whether she had her bags packed for what the messages reportedly call Operation Awesome, a plan prosecutors allege he orchestrated to facilitate her running away from her family's home in Lake Elsinore. He reportedly called the planned departure the most important day of her life. She was 13 years old at the time of those messages.
I think it also paints a great picture of just how convincing David can be as a liar, because when that body cam recording was taken in February of 2024, that's also the time period where we saw text message conversations today in court showing that David and Celeste were talking about something called OA, Operation Awesome, where they were plotting her departure, her runaway from her home in Lake Elsinore. And this struck me too. David appears to be the one pushing this. He's the one who keeps on asking her, do you have your bags packed? He tells her, bring everything you're going to use that I can immediately replace. Bring a bigger bag. Do you have everything packed? Are you ready to go? In one of these messages from that particular exchange, he calls that her runaway date, and I believe it was the day before Valentine's Day in 2024. He calls it the most important day of her life, aside from their anticipated wedding. Again, at this time, she is only 13 years old. This is just a couple weeks after, memorialized in these text messages, she apparently had an abortion.
This is a documented reversal in the evidentiary record, not a theory. It came out under testimony, was reported by journalists in the courtroom, and it flips the dynamic that had been widely assumed. When a narrative has been running unchallenged for months, and then evidence contradicts it in open court, that is exactly the moment to slow down and reassess what else might be wrong in the popular account.
That goes to the charge of alleged sexual abuse of a child, but this next part goes to motive in the alleged murder.
Turns out Asia Collins, who is an LA-based influencer, social media model, she's got a presence and a platform online. Turns out it was her association with David and their rumored friendship, or perhaps early stages of dating, that made Celeste incredibly upset. And that is what Celeste cites as the source of her anger when she is threatening David and telling him over text the night before he sent the Uber to pick her up and deliver her to his home. She tells him over text that she's going to, quote, mutilate his penis. She tells him that she doesn't want to see one more instance of David being tagged in posts with Asia Collins. Asia did come out on the record and state publicly, after the charges were filed against David, that she never dated him. She also came out and says she wants justice for Celeste.
And here's the key. The prosecution alleges Celeste was threatening David, saying she was going to expose him for child sexual abuse, and that's why he...
Now to the question the medical examiner's testimony raised, and that the defense will absolutely return to at trial. The cause of death listed in the autopsy is homicide, attributed to multiple penetrating injuries. That is on the record. What is also on the record is what the medical examiner, Dr. Grant Ho, could not say definitively, namely the specific type of instrument or weapon that caused those injuries, or who inflicted them. The advanced state of decomposition is the documented reason for those gaps. This is not speculation. The medical examiner testified to this directly.
What's more, the defense posed an interesting question to the medical examiner, Dr. Grant Ho. Could Celeste have killed herself?
Marilyn Bednarski was the one asking Dr. Grant Ho these questions. She wanted to know first, is it helpful for somebody doing an autopsy to maybe have information about whether the decedent has a mental health history? Is it helpful to know if they are suicidal? Is it helpful to know if they are habitual drug users? So to each of those questions, Dr. Ho answered, potentially. So then she asked him, did you have any conversations with the decedent's relatives to explore those characteristics? He did not. So then she proceeded to ask about the injuries, right? The documented injuries, these penetrating wounds, the disruption to one of her ribs, the damage noted on her liver. And the defense wants to know, can you definitively link those observations that were made during the autopsy to what you see on the overlaying skin? And do you know exactly how that occurred? Are you able to definitively report that somebody else caused those injuries? And I think the broad answer to all of this is the advanced state of decomposition precludes a lot of definitive information. The deputy ME simply cannot say how this happened or who did this to her. I don't know if this is actually going to end up being a building block for an argument that Celeste killed herself, but it's certainly a line of questioning that I think any sharp defense
attorney Blair Burke used the cross-examination to press on those limits. She asked whether it was helpful to have a subject's mental health history when conducting an autopsy, whether a history of self-harm would be relevant, whether the documented injuries could definitively be attributed to another person's actions. Dr. Ho's answers, per courtroom reporting, were measured and acknowledged the limitations imposed by the state of the remains. Now, to be clear, no credible account of this case is treating self-infliction as a likely explanation. The prosecutor and legal analysts who have spoken publicly about the hearing have noted the significant evidentiary and circumstantial problems with that theory. But the defense is doing what defense attorneys do, which is identifying every gap in the record and preserving the right to explore those gaps before a jury. That is not the same as those gaps being meaningful. It is worth distinguishing between a line of questioning and a credible alternative theory, and the documented record does not yet support the latter. Here is something that has not gotten nearly enough attention in the broader coverage of this case. Steve Fisher, a private investigator hired by the property owner who rented the Hollywood Hills home to David, was excluded from the preliminary hearing under contested circumstances. Fisher had previously appeared before the grand jury. Prosecutor Beth Silverman moved to exclude him, citing alleged violations of grand jury secrecy. Fisher, who spoke publicly about the incident, disputed that characterization. He stated in an interview that the family's attorney, Patrick Steinfeld, had approached him in the courthouse hallway, not the other way around, and that Steinfeld himself confirmed this on the record to the judge.
To the prosecutor in this case, the deputy DA, Beth Silverman, apparently Steve Fisher violated grand jury secrecy. And because of that, she made a request this morning for him to be excluded from the witness list. He was in the courtroom. He was sitting right by me. He stood up, acknowledged that request. There wasn't any kind of pushback. There was no argument there. And he walked out. So we're not going to hear from Steve Fisher in the courtroom as part of this preliminary hearing. But obviously, if this goes to trial,
what makes this angle significant is what Fisher had been doing before the hearing. He has said publicly that he collected neighborhood surveillance footage, digital evidence connecting David and Celeste, and that he raised questions early on about items at the property, including what he described as a burn cage and chainsaws, that he believed warranted attention before the investigation moved forward. The question of a missing third chainsaw is directly relevant here. Prosecutors say David purchased 3 chainsaws. 2 were recovered at the property and tested negative for blood, per the criminalist's testimony. The third has not been publicly accounted for. Fisher flagged the chainsaws as significant early in the investigation before charges were filed and was criticized for making those observations public. That context matters when evaluating why his courtroom exclusion is more than procedural drama.
On the second or third day, I was in the hallway waiting to get in the courtroom, and a gentleman came up to me who I had no idea who he was, in a suit, and he said, "I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Celeste family's attorney." It was Mr. Steinfeld. And I was sitting on the bench seats, and there's a lot of reporters around, so we went to the middle of the aisle of the courtroom, and he said some very nice things. They thanked me for keeping the story in the news, and I asked how the family was doing, and at that point, Beth Silverman came storming, and I mean storming, down the hallway, and physically grabbed him, pulled him away, and said, "You are not allowed to talk to him. That is illegal." And I was really confused, and there was a lot of reporters around that were very confused what happened, but I didn't say anything, but I didn't ultimately go in that day. But I went in the next day, and I was seated, and we were on the record already. And Beth Silverman said that she wanted to put something on the record, and she turned around and pointed to me and said, is not to be in this courtroom. He is broken grand jury secrecy laws. I'm having a warrant issued for his arrest, and said that he went up to the family who are witnesses, and he knows he's not allowed to talk to witnesses. He went up to the family yesterday and was trying to talk to them, and the judge, I gotta say, the judge was super professional. She said, listen, she can have you excluded because of the grand jury thing. She's like, I can't get into grand jury issues. And I said, listen, Your Honor, I'm fine leaving. I'm completely fine. I understand. And then that's when Beth threw the, he was trying to talk to witnesses, and I just asked her if I could say, Your Honor, can I put one thing on the record? And she's like, if it has anything to do with the grand jury, please don't. And I said, no, it doesn't. But I was actually approached by Mr. Seinfeld. I didn't even know who he was, and I didn't try to talk to them, even though I'm allowed to as an investigator. And at that time, I got to say, it was also very professional. He stood up and said, Your Honor, I want to put on the record as well that I did approach Mr. Fisher. It was not and at that moment when he did that, Beth spun around and just started mouthing things to him. And she didn't even take the time to learn if it was the case that I came up to them. She just made these assumptions. Anyway, so I did exit the courtroom, but I'm glad it was at least put on the record that I wasn't breaking any rules or anything like that. But so, I did leave.
At this point, here is the open question the documented record does not fully resolve, and it is worth genuinely thinking about. The prosecution's case, as presented at the preliminary hearing, is largely circumstantial. The DA himself said so publicly. There is no eyewitness to the alleged murder. There is no confirmed murder weapon. The phone and Tesla data placing David on the route to Santa Barbara, where Celeste's passport and personal items were later found, is compelling, but the defense has noted that neither the phone nor the car definitively proves David was the person operating them.
After David allegedly killed Celeste, prosecutors say he attempted to make a fake alibi, texting Celeste's phone asking, "Where are you at?" After that, David's phone and Tesla are both recorded heading 95 miles northwest to Santa Barbara County, the same place where Celeste's passport and personal items would later be recovered.
Now, I had questions when I first read some of the charging documents about why in the world anybody would take their own car, especially a car tricked out with software like a Tesla, to do anything that might be criminal. And on top of that, not just their car, but their iPhone. According to data they analyzed, traveled from the Hollywood Hills west along Sunset Boulevard and then north up the coast into Santa Barbara County. He's testifying how the path of that Tesla, again, according to his analysis of data, matches the path of David's iPhone. Same time, same day, same location. And he's testifying how that matches up with where Celeste's passport card was later found, right by Lake Cachuma off of State Road 154 in Santa Barbara County.
And the defense says, okay, David's car and iPhone were making that trip. Sure, but we can't prove it was David himself in the car with that phone.
We haven't seen any definitive proof yet that links David to the actual murder. We haven't seen any video that actually shows him committing that alleged act. We haven't heard from any witnesses who say they watched it happen. That is missing. We don't know what else they may present. This preliminary hearing, of course, is just one step in the process. This is not all of their evidence. These are not all of their witnesses. It's
The DA said additional evidence exists beyond what was presented at the preliminary hearing. That statement was made on record. What that evidence is has not been disclosed.
Alone.
No, it's not difficult if it's strong circumstantial evidence. They've done it before in so many different cases. It's not surprising the prosecution didn't present everything they possibly have at a preliminary hearing. They don't have to. They just have to present the bare minimum to get it to go forward. They don't want to taint the investigation. I wonder if it's a little bit of strategy in terms of what they're showing to the defense, even though they're supposed to hand over all their evidence to the defense as well. What I think it could be is witness testimony, right? We didn't hear from Neo Langston. We didn't hear from Asia Collins, two individuals who were purportedly in David's orbit Neil Langston was reportedly arrested for failing to appear as a witness. We believe he testified in front of the grand jury. I'm curious what they would have to say if they're called as witnesses. Remember, one of the things in one of the prosecution's filing is that David allegedly lied to friends and associates about the smell of decomposition, right? The odor. Did we hear any testimony about that? I don't recall that in the preliminary hearing. There's a question about where's that missing chainsaw? They claim that David purchased 3 chainsaws. 2 of them that were found at the property tested negative for blood. Can you make the argument that the third one is what was used to dismember her body? Where is it? Is it in Santa Barbara anywhere? That's something I interviewed Steve Fisher about on Sidebar. So this is a rapidly investigated. I mean, they're continuing to get, I have to imagine they continue to get evidence in this case, and investigation's fluid. But those are the things that I wonder, are they going to have more from? And by the way, you and I both know the prosecutors, they were trying to subpoena David's family. For what purpose? What did they know about this alleged purported relationship? What can they say about the registration of the Tesla? What comments did David allegedly made to them, assuming there's no hearsay issue? So those are people that I think also may testify and may be part of the prosecution's case. But again, I don't think that they want to release more to the public.
So the question worth sitting with is this. Given that the prosecution's own lead attorney acknowledged this is a circumstantial case, and given that significant gaps in the physical evidence remain publicly unresolved, what do you think the undisclosed evidence is, and how much weight should circumstantial evidence carry in a case of this magnitude? That is a real interpretive question, not a manufactured controversy, and it is one the jury will eventually have to answer. 2 aspects of how this case has spread online are worth naming directly. The first is the tendency to treat the preliminary hearing as equivalent to a conviction. A preliminary hearing sets a low evidentiary bar, and legal analysts covering this case have been consistent in making that point. Probable cause is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Those are structurally different standards, and collapsing them does a disservice to both the severity of the charges and the integrity of the process.
Trial.
Not surprised, because the bar for this case to move forward, whether there's sufficient probable cause to support the charges, is quite low. It's quite low. It's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Having said that, and this is something I do want to get into, there was a question for me whether the prosecution presented enough evidence at this stage to support first-degree murder and the special circumstances allegations. If you ask me, when it comes to the charge of continuous sexual abuse of a minor, when you talk about the alleged photos and text messages that were found on David's device, or purportedly found on his device, that's enough. When you talk about mutilation of human remains, the alleged purchase history, the forensic material, the Tesla, the alleged Santa Barbara trips, seemed to be enough for me there. When it came to first-degree murder, and by the way, I interviewed Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochman last night on my News Nation show. The defense raised some interesting questions about, you don't have the murder weapon. The chainsaws that were tested negative for blood. How do you know exactly what happened in the house? There was no surveillance footage. The Uber driver can't definitively say where he dropped Celeste off. There was no text messages before or communication before, or at least presented during the preliminary hearing, that David intended to kill Celeste, that Celeste seemingly invited herself over, and that she wasn't lured. There was a question of also, this idea that Celeste threatened David. Was there a self-defense argument? Did she do something to herself? I'm not saying any of that's going to work, but there was a question, did they present enough of first-degree murder and the special circumstances allegations of lying in wait and killing for financial gain and killing a witness, that I thought they were good arguments by the defense. So I was waiting to see that, but clearly at this point the judge said prosecution met the threshold. This now goes to trial, and a jury will have to decide.
The second is the circulation of details that have not been verified in any court proceeding or documented reporting. The hearing produced a significant volume of verified information. That verified information is disturbing enough on its own terms. The pattern of adding unverified detail to already serious documented fact is something this kind of case attracts, and it is worth actively resisting. David Burke is due in court on August 31st for his arraignment on the charges. The Los Angeles County DA has stated the office has not yet decided whether to pursue the death penalty, which the special circumstances attached to the first-degree murder charge make eligible, even under California's current moratorium on executions. Legal analysts have noted that pursuing the death penalty would significantly extend the timeline to trial, a factor the DA's office has acknowledged in public statements.
Pursue. So can you kind of talk a bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. This is a weapon. This is an advantage for the prosecution to use. And even if you're on death row, your life is different than just being life in prison. The important part about this, and again, not to just self-promote, but I have to for this purpose.
You have to.
I interviewed Nathan Hochman. I asked him, you know, what we saw, I mean, we didn't see it. We were just reading the reporting on it. But these graphic photos of Celeste's body being dismembered, the allegedly graphic, sexually explicit photos and messages. You really want to put a jury through this? You really want a jury to see all of this about a 14-year-old girl? Do you want the family to go through this? Is there an avenue? Is there a path by which you would accept a plea deal in this case? Could you use the death penalty as a way for a bargaining chip? Like, David, we'll take the death penalty off the table if you plead guilty, right? He said to me, if David wants to come forward with a plea deal, we'd be open to that conversation. So I think that is something that is strategically being kept back. But also with any prosecution, the death penalty complicates.
The trial itself could realistically be years away. The evidence that has not yet been made public will determine how much of what circulates in the interim holds up.
David is due back in court on August 31st for his arraignment. Because of the nature of the case, he could face the death penalty, but so far, the LA County DA says his team hasn't decided if they're going to pursue it. And that is where today's episode of Scandal leaves us for now. If you like what you saw and you want to see more or connect with me on social media, you can find me on places like Instagram at Sierra Gillespie.
There is one thread that this hearing did not resolve and that a follow-up will address in depth. The question of who else, if anyone, knew what was happening in that house and what the subpoenas directed at people in David's orbit are actually seeking, that investigation is ongoing, and the answers, when they come, will reshape the public understanding of this case again. Because if the preliminary hearing taught us anything, it is that the version of the story you were told first was probably incomplete. If you have a read on what the prosecution's undisclosed evidence might be, or where the circumstantial case has the biggest holes, put it in the comments. That is a real conversation worth having. And follow for the next case, because this one is far from over.